So my name is Stuart DeQ. I'm the program director at the Yale Center for Business and the Environment and a 2011 graduate of the School of Management and the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. And today we have really privileged to have 4 experts from the F&ES community who are going to talk about what sustainability looks like and the sustainability agenda would look like under the new administration. Just to set a bit of context before introducing our panelists here, when you think back in August, when we scheduled these panels, I think many people thought that there would be, when we were developing the series in the faculty seminar, this might be a different discussion than we're having today. And when you then think about what over the course of the past 3 weeks has gone on and how this has developed and conversations have developed, both within the Yale community among students, when you have 1,000 people meeting to kind of consider what the response is and how people rally and organize, to people not being able to be squeezed into a room with Bob Sussman going over every bit of what the kind of agenda looks like and how we need to respond to it, to individual communities and groups just meeting on their own and trying to figure out what it looks like going forward. It speaks in large part, in my mind, to the orientation of the community, particular here at F&ES, which is one that is focused on and being trained in how do you navigate uncertainty and complexity in complex systems. And so to see that the community here has immediately kind of responded, self-organized, and is actively now gone through the kind of understanding of this is the new reality, and now we need to figure out a way forward, is the focus and purpose of the panel today, to look at a number of different perspectives on the first essential question that I'm going to ask to the panelists, and then focus on some follow-up questions that we've gotten from the audience prior to the panel, but then also any questions that you may have. And welcome to everybody and all the alumni and others online who are tuning in to the live stream. So if you see the live question box right there, you can actually log in using your Yale ID, and apologies to those who don't have a net ID, and submit live questions and vote on the other questions that have been submitted. So I took a lot of the questions that people submitted online and added them in to that form. You can look at those, vote on those, comment on them, add your other questions in, and that can continue the dialogue as we go forward. So feel free to take out your laptop at a certain point and log in and use that link if you so choose. So the central question that we're going to ask, that I'm going to ask all 4 folks to respond to, and they're each going to respond with a specific community or group in mind, is what are the most creative and effective ways to engage the new administration on environmental issues? And that being engagement broadly defined of anything from collaboration to direct opposition and legal action to stalling. I mean, what is the sort of full spectrum of strategies and tactics that one can employ to figure out how do we respond as a community and a group who care about environmental issues? And so we've got Mary Evelyn, who, if you guys don't know Mary Evelyn, you should take a class and be inspired and fill up your soul a little bit. She is a wonderful professor here at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and she's going to take the perspective of the environmental movement broadly and writ large. What is that kind of, what should the response from that community look like? Paul Anastas has been through transitions that are tricky ones in administration. So he's been from a Clinton to a Bush transition in the Office of Technology and Policy in the White House, and then led innovation efforts inside the EPA. So in terms of, Paul's going to represent what are the political responses and what does the domestic policy response look like. We've got a wonderful guest who's been teaching a class that's been getting rave reviews on the Sustainable Development Goals, Julia Marton-Lefevre, who used to run the IUCN, and is here as the Bass Distinguished Scholar of Environmental Policy. And she's going to be representing what the scientific community's response to this should be, as well as the kind of international NGOs that represent some of that scientific community. And then Ben Cashore has led and focused on the ways that we don't actually have to necessarily think that governance always has to come from a federal level, but can come from a lot of different pockets. And there's all these non-governance strategies, as well as being an expert in international policy on environmental issues. And Ben is going to represent the international policy response. And so after each three go through that central question and look at this, then we'll have a dialogue back and forth where some of them may challenge or build on each other's statements, which is highly encouraged. And then open it up to you all. And we have 2 mics, as everybody can see. So we'll ask that if folks want to ask a question here in the audience, we can both pull them online through the form, but that you stand up, line up, ask your question. Please try to keep your question brief. We want questions, not statements, so people have time to respond here. And then also make sure you give your name and affiliation so we know where you're from, who you are, where you're coming from. To kick it off, Mary Evelyn, what's your perspective on where we go from here? Where does the environmental movement or community go from here? What is the most creative and effective response to this new administration?
Of course, if I could answer that question, we'd all be very happy, but it's a huge question. And I'm going to really take a step back from the specifics of it, which I think some of my colleagues will get into. And I want to raise the question of why this election presented what I would call a distorted American dream, and what the responsibility is of the environmental movement to respond to that. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the American dream had a notion of you succeed and you contribute to civil society. It had both of those kinds of things. But this American dream that was presented and is seductive, clearly, for a lot of people, is one that I would say is identified by hyper-individualism. The person, me, number one. By unrestrained sense of consumption. Materialism without limits. That's your major goal in life. And definitely a jingoistic materialism. American exceptionalism. We are the best, the brightest, and will always be so. So what is needed then from our way of thinking, from a broader environmental movement, which I'll suggest in a moment? We need to reconfigure not just individualism, but individuals connected to the human family, a much broader sense of who humans are. And we need not just consumption, but we need the integration with the community of life. Where do these things come from? The community of life. And we need not simply nationalism, but a partnership with the community of nations. This is so clear on the international level. That is what is most needed. So Leopold, one of our tremendous graduates here, said, Earth is not a commodity, but a community. And he re-identified that community for a land ethics. That is what we're about. That's our legacy, re-identifying an Earth community. So I would suggest then that the environmental movement has a role in revisioning this dream, and especially for the Earth community. That's a new term in many ways for us. It's not just the land ethic. It's an expansion of those ideas that Leopold held so eloquently. So sustainability then even is about not just sustainable things and so on. I like to say my marriage isn't just sustainable, it's flourishing, it's alive, it's juicy. So let's take sustainability into the flourishing of life, into something that's exciting, something that's inviting, something that captures the imagination. So the flourishing of life means the common good for all future generations. This requires an integral ecology. That's what was presented in the papal encyclical Laudato Si. It is already capturing the imagination of millions of people around the world. That is a vision of people and the planet, of Earth and human mutually enhancing relations. So the challenge then is, what does this look like for the environmental movement? An integrated environmental movement. So if we say that the modern environmental movement began with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring with a metaphor that changed everything, because we could not imagine a spring without birds, without bird song. Silent Spring captured an imagination and changed our history. It also began with the '69 oil spill in Santa Barbara. We are still dealing with that legacy all over the planet. North America, Standing Rock, a complete legacy of this problem of oil and energy and gas. So, how then, amidst this modern environmental movement, because we know the 19th century had a robust one of Muir and Emerson and Thoreau and so on, what is our legacy? That movement was created amidst civil rights in this country, an explosion of an apartheid society trying to reconfigure itself, which we are still living out. So an integrated environmental movement has got to embrace social and economic justice in new ways. Everyone knows this, and we had a wonderful series last year of these voices that need to be included. African Americans, Latinos, and American Indians in new ways, as Standing Rock illustrates. But it was also amidst an anti-war movement that the environmental movement arose. It was anti-Vietnam War and anti-nuclear demonstrations that were larger than almost any we have seen on the planet. I'm saying this with passion because I'm a 60s person and I was deeply involved with the civil rights movements and the anti-Vietnam War movement and nuclear movement. So what am I suggesting? I'm saying then that we need to include justice and peace issues in our new integrated environmental movement. And let me make it very clear. The peace movement has got to come into our thinking. Why? The military budget of our American Department of Defense, $523 billion, almost as much as the next 14 nations, and way beyond the rest of the world. It is incomparable around the world. This is the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned against, and we've got to think about it robustly. So I'm going to summarize here one final point. The Earth Charter is a document that brought this integrated vision forward with ecology, justice, and peace. Julia was deeply involved in it. Many of us worked on the drafting of it. But that is a vision that captures these streams that were integral to this environmental movement from the beginning. So what do we need at our school? If we are producing many of the leaders for this environmental movement, we need a more robust environmental education, rethinking our curriculum. And that involves, we've got tremendous science. We need system science. We need sustainability science. But we also need to communicate it, as Roger Cohn is trying to do in 360, and Tony Lacerowitz with the climate communication, and Paul Lussier in his class. We've got to communicate this, and as Oz is trying to do with story. So we need as well a robust conversation about policy. Why is it that science and policy are in such tension? What is a new integrated vision on a planet where ecosystems are endangered, where the life of the planet is endangered? So what does it mean to advocate? How are we advocates for the future of planetary life? We must put ourselves into that conversation in a more robust way. And finally, if we don't find a way to have the human not at the center of the conversation, but integrated into mutually enhancing human-Earth relations, we will miss this great opportunity to say, okay, social sciences and humanities need to come into this conversation. So my final plea is, how can we educate if we don't know the history of the environmental movement, or the history of different parts of the world, of cultures in different parts of the world? We must have history, we must have literature, we must have the arts, we must have philosophy and religion integrated into this, because without an expanded environmental ethics, we cannot make a robust environmental movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So if you... So if you can't solve a problem, you need to enlarge it and include other aspects into it. And Paul, how does this translate into the U.S. or domestic policy response? What does this look like for us to engage and figure out a creative way forward?
Well, it's wonderful following Mary Evelyn because she does such a fabulous job of structuring the philosophical construct that I get to just move on to the more tactical, perhaps strategic types of things. So thank you. So one of the things that I think that is so important is because of recent events, we need to ask ourselves the big question, and the big question since November 9th now is, and therefore, okay? That is a given. We've got that the election results as a given. We have the new administration as a given. What's the and therefore? What's the path forward? And one of the things that one of the many things that my dad used to tell me, that is one of the many things that has stuck with me, is that you have to speak the language of the tribe you're talking to. Yes. You have to speak the language of the tribe you're talking to. And that is so crucial because it will be really tempting to emote and say exactly not only the things that we believe in, but the way that we feel that they ought to be accomplished. And there should be no shock that if that is the strategy, it will fall on deaf ears and no progress will be made, I'm going to suggest. Being more wed to your mechanisms than you are to your goals, I'd say is probably a poor strategy. And that if we say, well, the way that we've achieved progress in the past is by having regulations passed in order to that is being more wed to your mechanisms than your goals. And what's important is the goals. And so, what is it that the financial advisors say? Past performance does not guarantee future results. So if you start looking at what we've done since Rachel Carson, and that's the model, and we stick to that, my goodness, I wouldn't recommend that as a good strategy. So if you start thinking about, all right, what is the end there for? What is the path forward? Then let's take a step back and we say, all right, sustainability. We all talk, live, eat, breathe to the depths of our soul about sustainability. Do we actually believe that sustainability does bring about greater economic benefit for social consequence and uplifting? If we genuinely believe that, then we should be able to make genuine economic arguments for why sustainability is a superior model. I thoroughly believe that it is, but we don't do as good a job at articulating that as perhaps will be necessary. Do we genuinely believe that issues like climate change and resource depletion and are, among so many other things, national security issues? Certainly the Pentagon believes that. I absolutely believe that. Do we do a good job at articulating that? Perhaps not as well as we should. Will that be something that the tribe we're talking to can understand? Perhaps it is. Do we believe that local, we'll say, perhaps biofeedstock, industrial ecology systems help generate local economies and local jobs and necessarily keep those jobs from being relocated elsewhere? If we believe that to be true, which I do, we need to articulate that. So why do I go through these just few examples? Because it's about the goals that we share and putting them in a context that can be not only understood, but supported and advanced. Just one other point that I'd want to make is knowing what levers can be pulled domestically and knowing what actions are going to have results is going to be really important. So there's a wide range of different types of actions, and everything from public awareness and expressing opposition all the way to there are statutory requirements compelling For instance, the EPA, in order to take action legally, there's ways of doing that. There's a range of knowing what levers to pull. And I'm not here to say that any one person needs to engage in any particular one, but rather to know which levers are there and which ones play to your skill sets in order to identify which actions you should take. The one admonition that I might suggest is you probably want to fight the fights, or let me just say, address the issues that are going to make a difference rather than ones that are going to be only symbolic. Don't get me wrong, there's power in symbolism, there's power in addressing iconic issues. But knowing that, for instance, that budget is the reflection of policy, and that's where the reality lies. Knowing that the White House Office of Management and Budget has tremendous influence across the domestic agency. Knowing that the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs is the one who acts as the gatekeeper to any actions, both regulatory and voluntary. Knowing these things and expressing support, opposition, engagement. There's many communities to engage: industry, business, foundations, media, on and on. Engaging those non-governmental sectors will be absolutely essential. And the last thing I'd say is there's a tremendous history of people with very good intentions doing the right things and doing them wrong. So by focusing narrowly, whether it's on your pet issue or your pet program or your pet, you might even get your narrow victory for your narrow provision in a piece of legislation, and you will wind up perhaps causing cascading unintended consequences. And thinking through what this issue is, what we're all trying to advance in terms of sustainability, human health, the environment, wildlife, the connection to Earth. Thinking of this holistically and strategically is going to be absolutely essential. I'll leave it at that.
Great. So we're enlarging, please. I'd say hold the applause, but it's pretty hard after these, so let it out. We're enlarging the problem, figuring that out, and we're speaking new languages and figuring out how we understand the languages that everyone else is speaking at the same time, and how can that be applied most effectively to specific strategies and tactics. And so, Julia, now we turn to you to talk about, this is a group of people drawn to science, who care about it, who are analytical, who believe in the scientific method and process. How should the scientific community respond creatively and effectively to this new administration?
Thank you. So I should say, first of all, that the invitation to me was about international and scientific. But science has always been international, so let's not think that it only belongs inside the great American dream, which, by the way, is not always looked at as the most wonderful thing to aspire to. In other countries. That's just the way it is. Exactly. I think we should know. Yes. So when I got this invitation in August, when it seemed much easier, Karen's letter said, what strategies might the next president employ to make the U.S. more sustainable? It's not quite what's up there. And I would say from the outset that I would have changed the title of this panel to stress that not only the U.S. needs to become sustainable, but it should be interested in the sustainability of its neighbors, the other countries, the communities of nations, everywhere. And why would that speak to the new administration, different from what I thought would be the administration in August? Because I think that if sustainability is achieved, or at least we're firmly on the path toward it, not only the United States but everywhere, then the United States, I think, will feel more secure if others feel sustainably safer and comfortable in their own country. So therefore, not everybody will want to come here, maybe. I come from a refugee family, and I can tell you that most people would like to stay at home in their own cultures, in their own countries, if they would feel sustainably, that is on the long term, safer. So this could be something that we could explain. I totally agree that our biggest challenge is to find out how to communicate with the other. And I think that has been our big problem here. We talk to each other. I personally, and I hope some of you will tell me afterwards, I just don't know anybody who voted for Mr. Trump. but I should have. And I don't know anybody who's going to vote for Marine Le Pen in France, where I'm also going to vote next year. So we need to be able to talk to the other, and that's very, very important. And I think for this administration, we have to very gently communicate that globalization is a reality and that we cannot turn our backs, and we should make it worthwhile for everybody. So, Mary Evelyn, you mentioned the community of nations, and I think you should know that, this is now wearing my international hat, you should know that the United States has always been a little bit ambivalent about being involved in international things. Let's not think that the Democratic administration was so amazing. The United States has pulled out twice from UNESCO, the only UN agency which has S for science in its name, and pulled out rather than help to make it better. It's still out right now. I have views on UNESCO, but I would have tried to improve it first before walking away. The U.S. is not a party to the Convention on Biological Diversity, even though the Republicans see themselves, and I have a whole bunch of articles here written by Republicans, now I'm getting educated, see themselves as the party of the conservatives being the party of conservation. And if you look back at the history of this country, that's true. So it's not a party to the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, for example. I think the United States has been a rather reluctant participant in the Climate Convention. It did much better in Paris, but it hasn't been exactly enthusiastic. And then it's not clear to me at all, except for President Obama's very good speech last September at the UN, to what extent the U.S., Democrat or the new Republican administration has or will take the Sustainable Development Goals seriously enough. And I think that's important. I mean, I think it will be difficult for the United States to understand that the SDGs are not only about rich countries helping the poor ones, but it's about all of us. We've got to make sure that there are fewer poor people in New Haven by 2030 than there are today, not only in Panama or in Tanzania or something like that. So, and of course, for that, we're going to have to pay much more than the minimum that we pay toward that goal of 0.7% of gross national income. So in other fora, I would say that internationally in scientific fora, the U.S. has been a little bit more active in IUCN, which has this amazing design of governments and NGOs together. The State Department is a member. I hope it will continue. 5 government agencies are also members. Interestingly enough, and coming back to looking at the larger picture, I don't know how many of you know the International Council for Science, established at the latter part of the 19th century. I was the director for many years, and I try to push that community of natural scientists to include the human dimensions of everything we're talking about, the social scientists. It never happened under my leadership, unfortunately, but finally, a few weeks ago, that community of natural or hard scientists have decided to merge with the International Social Science Council. That is big news. It should really be on the front pages. So looking at the whole picture. And the U.S. U.S. scientific community, the National Academy has been encouraging of that. So that's not too bad. But let's not think that the United States has been really a leader in this community of nations. Whether the United Nations exists, either let's get rid of it or let's make it better, but let's really work on it. So I think the challenge for the new administration, for us, those of us who want to engage, and I think we have no choice, having woken up after the 9th of November morning, a little bit surprised. I think now we should, either we stay in bed all day, which is a possibility, or, but not for Yale students, or we engage and we learn the language, we learn the ways. For example, again, on nature, after all, is the one unifying value, I think, everywhere in the world. I've never met anyone in any country who didn't like to walk in a clean forest and have clean air. Remember, Mr. Trump himself at that lunch meeting with the New York Times said, yes, clean air is important, clear water is important. He doesn't like to talk about climate change. Let's get to it with another set of words, another language. Let's make sure we appeal to him and to his colleagues in the new administration from the business angle. Let's set up partnerships, really, with business, with the military, for example. I've got lots of examples, which we'll do later. So climate and biodiversity or conservation, I think, could be approached, but in a friendly, patient, new vocabulary, and I feel very strongly about that. So communication, I think, has been the leitmotif in the three of us. Let's see what you come up with.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me first of all say that I have no idea what to say.
You're an honest man.
Yeah, no, I've thought about this. We've all been thinking for the last 2 weeks. Should we engage, not engage? Should we be mad? Should we communicate? And I do not know the answer. I'm still in a period of reflecting and mourning and wondering what should happen. After all, I thought that in American political life, that the language that was used in this campaign and the suggestions that were raised that were incredibly racist, to ban all Muslims, a Muslim registry, the xenophobic comments, equating Mexicans with violent criminals, to name just a few. I thought those were disqualifiers, regardless of one's partisan and policy positions, and I was wrong. I'm a political scientist, and I was wrong, so I don't really know yet how to handle that. I'm uncomfortable with the idea that we should now be communicating with that view. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I just don't know. And so I think we should ponder this question carefully. We wouldn't want to communicate with those who are supporting Hitler. We wouldn't want to do that. So do we just want to communicate, or do we want to think about broader questions? How do we not know this was actually not a disqualifier? What are the issues that we as a community are not addressing because we seem to be so on one side of this issue? What are the differences, the power struggles internally in this community that was basically anti this inflammatory language? What are the social justice issues that we perpetuate by me living in a largely white suburb and not addressing New Haven issues? What are the issues with tax privileges that benefit Yale University and not public state schools? I mean, are we actually not addressing, thinking about the right questions because we have to communicate and get along? I don't know the answer to that question. I foster policy learning around problems, so I just do not know anymore, and I think we should be pondering this question carefully. What I would not want to happen is, in the interest of learning the language of the tribe and whatever they present as the way to go, that we actually reinforce what is a severe and serious and significant challenge. And not just in American life, we see it elsewhere in the world too. So I just don't know. And so I want to treat these as hypotheses, not as ways to go. Is it SDGs? I don't know. It might be. Is it linking with the military as a defense issue? It might be. Is it linking to the peace community? Could be. I just don't know. So I just hope we can stop. We can maybe move from our ideas that make a lot of sense normatively, but think about what are their causal implications for these broader struggles. And not all of them are positive, I think. So that's just a mea culpa. Everything else is just ideas now, because I do not know anything. Okay. Given that, I would say to understand a bit about me, it's not just that I'm an international relations expert. Somebody once called me a bumblebee social scientist because I worked on initially regulations governing public land management in the U.S. Northwest and British Columbia. Then I moved to eco-labeling systems that brought me here in a school that loves market mechanisms. And then I went to global forest governance, and I went to the tropics in developing countries. So I just keep on learning, right? And therefore I have bits and pieces from different areas. But what motivates me are the actual problems that I think motivated most of you for coming here. So in my head, even though I'm known for developing theory and abstract stuff, concepts and stuff, I actually have in my head 3 problem definitions that guide my thinking. So one is, as those students in my class know, a northern spotted owl is in my head all the time. This represents that we are now in the, as Bill Clark pointed out again, the 6th great extinction of the planet. The first one Homo sapien caused, but not the first one, the 6th, okay? And so that owl for me, and how we address that, gives us traction for whether we are addressing this, the 6th great extinction of the planet. Anything we do, business, government relations, private sector stuff, ask the question, is that owl getting help or is it getting hurt, okay? There are 2 certification programs in the world, the Forest Stewardship Council and the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, PFC. PFC is a bunch of national, local efforts. The group that began the PFC in the United States, SFI, emerged because they were opposed to the solutions for the spotted owl. They do not have any riparian buffer zone in their standards, which is my second problem definition, a riparian zone where water comes through it and it nurtures the whole ecosystem, okay? Which we learn from our scientists here is critical to any kind of problem-solving effort. What do we do for that riparian buffer zone? It turns out that a lot of business-government interactions, not a happy story. Some are actually really interesting and potential, but it's potential, and we're conflating them all. Hey, let's do private sector now because we've got the Trump administration in. They love that choice. I care about this riparian zone. The third one is, of course, the climate crisis. Okay, we're now hearing that Paris was a success, despite international relations scholars saying, oh, and by the way, we're going to get to 5 degrees Celsius with a successful agreement. I never could understand that. So I'm curious about how we got a successful agreement that can't meet what they now have as more prescriptive goals, 1.5. They doubled down on the commitments approach, but didn't have any standards, didn't have any requirements, behavioral requirements in that agreement. So far this sounds really depressing. Okay? However, I think there actually is hope. Okay? I think the actual hope is that Paris does get us to think about a bunch of policy triggers that could over time do some important, really important things without international substantive agreements and even without friendly U.S. administration. Let's face it, even with Hillary, it would have been minimal. Yeah. But it turns out there are a bunch of things you can do that can have, well, you know, my lab is progressive incremental effects that over time can actually make a difference, that can cascade outward and be really important. And I would say let's tap into those examples. I'll give you one only given my time, but I think this is pretty key. So one example doesn't come from America, although it could have. It comes from my home province of British Columbia, Canada. Okay? Given I'm Canadian, a lot of my examples start from there. And my policy class knows this, but forgive me, I got to say it anyway. Okay? A neoliberal premier 8 years ago watched Al Gore's PowerPoint on the climate crisis. And he changed normatively his concerns about the world. And the science was presented to him very clearly, okay, communication very clearly, but he changed. And he said, you know, this is more important than economic growth. We have to get to 2 degrees Celsius. What can I do? The economist told him you have to get a collective international binding agreement to act, to be meaningful, otherwise your emissions will get replaced somewhere else. And he said, no, I'm going to do my part. He brought in a carbon tax, you know, a small policy trigger and a small population in Canada. What did this do? He didn't just say, oh, okay, little trigger, done. How do I make this actually an entrenched policy? A very smart guy. And so he said, okay, we're going to make it revenue neutral. So politically, it's got a lot more palatability. You've got to reduce taxes elsewhere. Very smart. Nothing to do with climate, to do with politics, but it made it more entrenched. Then he said, hey, I'm going to give half the resources to the municipalities who are cash-starved to build things that are important. And so he did. They built things, okay? Which, by the way, they must now maintain that support for that carbon tax. Otherwise, they can't keep on paying for those things they built. Okay, he locked it in, entrenched over time. Then he said, hey, let's give half of it to consumers as a check, your carbon check, okay? Which he did, which generated broader popular support. None of those things matter for the carbon crisis, but they matter for thinking about durability and expansion over time. And to me, we've got to roll up our sleeves collectively, think more carefully about what we do well in this school, causal relationships, causal understandings. How do we go from point A not to B, but point A to B to C to D to E and F? That triggers not just self-interested efforts, but also normative change that I don't think necessarily the SDGs will get us to. They might, but I think there are other pathways for norm change that we're not exploring because we're saying, hey, the mechanism is saying norms matter. Norms do matter. But sometimes norm changes, gay marriage, smoking, didn't come from an effort saying, let's change the norms. They came from agitation. They came from small municipal bans of smoking that then led to a cascading effect. Let's tap into those processes in a way that actually could make the election of Trump less relevant and still not have to engage in his kind of rhetoric. And those are my thoughts.
Yeah, good point.
So we've got a tremendous amount to work with up here on the panel with ideas that have been thrown out, a number of questions that you all have voted on online. I first want to give the panelists an opportunity to comment and expand on the comments that you've all heard. Where would you challenge, build on, or push back on something that somebody else in the panel has said? Mary Evelyn, maybe you could start first.
Just quickly, because I'd love to hear the questions.
Yeah.
I think this was an illustration of principles, strategies, and tactics. That's exactly the flow. But if we don't get the principles right, the strategies, we got a lot of people who know the strategies and tactics sitting up here. And I also just want to underscore what Julia said. The American dream is part of the bubble that we live in. Like that this is the goal of life. And if we haven't, as an environmental community, articulated the beauty and complexity and brilliance of a living world. We're missing. And all the mechanisms in the world, all the new energy technique, we have so much in the toolkit, but we have to make the connection to why it matters and so on, but also with this deep sensibility that still needs to be articulated, I think, within the environmental movement. It can't be left back to Muir or Emerson or Thoreau. We need a new, vital sense of why this is important.
Just very quickly, I'd follow up on something that Ben mentioned with regard to communicating with folks that you disagree with. And I just add that civil discourse, communication isn't necessary for people that you agree with. Mm-hmm. It's necessary because you do disagree with people, and you do disagree with them sometimes passionately. And that's when civil discourse becomes its most essential, quite frankly, when it's most uncomfortable. And so engaging with, I will say, I'll leave it at that. But, but what's really critical is when you engage, you need to be so clear on your principles, on your framework, so that you don't inadvertently enable things that you do not agree with. So clear on your direction, clear on your goals, clear on your principles. The only last thing that I'll say is problem definition is crucial. Really clear problem. So if you were to say, our problem is a definition is we want to reduce carbon emissions. If you have a problem definition of we want to provide clean drinking water, and I could go on and on. You can do each of those things in the right way or the wrong way. You can accomplish reducing carbon and create all kinds of unintended consequences. You can provide clean drinking water and do it with acutely lethal substances like chlorine, as we've all seen. Doing the right things right takes a systems perspective, and sometimes very narrow policy prescriptions will not get you where you really want to go.
So I'd just like to say that I think making America great again, or great finally, cannot happen in isolation. Yeah. So I think if we would appeal to the sense of wanting to be great again, or for the first time, and wanting to be competitive to the new administration, I think we do need to reach out. I would say that I wouldn't have wanted to talk to Hitler, but maybe somebody should have. Anyway, that was a very sad part of our history. But I think we do need to reach out and to show the competitive advantage of becoming great. You cannot become great unless you're a part of this world community. You cannot do it alone. We cannot take this country and send it up to another planet. It's a part of the world community, and I think that's what we should use in our arguments, and again, using different language. I really like sustainability. It was hardly ever used in any of the two campaigns, and that's what we're talking about. I really like this definition of sustainable development that I've learned from a friend, treating the earth as if you intended to stay. And Mr. Trump and his grandchildren think they're going to stay with all of his hotels and so on. So you want to stay in a place which is clean, which has good water, which has a good lifestyle, American or not. And let's try to use those arguments, which are not so different from what we believe in. I just want to say that I do think that the international, and that includes the United States, scientific community does need to organize to become a part of a well-thought-out movement. And that movement doesn't only have to happen in global fora, which is where I've been working, that's important, but also locally, municipally, yes, in British Columbia, absolutely. And I think in this country, it seems to me that leadership has come from those parts of this country, and let's keep working with them. Let's talk to the mayor of New Haven and so on.
Great. Thank you.
So just briefly, I know you want to have questions. Yeah. So just, where I come at this kind of thing, wherever I hear an argument about what we should do, in my brain I convert it into a hypothesis, okay? So that's just what I do. So when I hear Paul saying that you need to actually engage those you most disagree with as it being essential, my hypothesis is if you engage those you disagree with, is you get more effective results. And so I think about my own research and the own scholarship I'm involved in, and I see contrary empirical observations as well as positive ones. Sure. So for example, a lot of positive results on the environment came from heavy conflict. and heavy disputes that didn't engage conversations around compromise or around problems. So I don't think that the data is consistent with a universal hypothesis like that, even though normatively it might give us traction for doing something. And a bigger point, though, I think, is the difficulty we're all having in the language we're using. And I think we're all a little bit almost scared about how we articulate things. We want to be nice and kind, and we should be respectful of everybody. At the same time, people are feeling a lot of strong emotion that often leads to statements being made that aren't always said in the perfect way. But I know in our own research that people are not worrying too much about that, even if it creates anxiety, it does lead to significant and positive change for the kinds that Mary Evelyn was talking about. So I wouldn't want to say that, the perfect way to say things and engaging with somebody who's not addressing the environment would come at the expense of what we know to be significant ways in which transformations can actually occur. Okay, this example of Yale students being snowflakes. Have you guys heard this thing? Okay, because we all cried and got emotional. And yep. Okay, so we're all snowflakes, and one professor here said, "Oh well, my students aren't. They're tough. They're in economics and they're tough and they did their exam." I think the exact opposite. I think, we should be snowflakes at that time. And also, I remember that snowflakes, do melt when it gets warm out. But when snowflakes are cold and there's a powerful storm happening, they come together and they can create transformative change. You snowflakes. So I'm just not sure that it's always so easy to know what to do exactly, and therefore I just don't know, but let's puzzle this through together.
Well, there's a number of questions online. And
one sentence that I just want to mention, I would never want to confuse engagement with agreement or acquiescence.
Yeah, but I think even this school perpetuates that approach, though. Our school accidentally does that.
Yeah. And one of the things I hope people are seeing is there is a spectrum of approaches that you're seeing on the panel here, which this community has to understand and appreciate, that all actors and arms and legs need to work at the same time toward a common goal with different approaches. There's a tremendous number of questions on what the faculty response should be to this, what the administration or what an academic institution's responsibility is, and to your point, how should it respond in terms of preparation and curriculum? So, is it this question on the role of academic institutions in this next stage? And then the second question, which I'd like people to address as well, which has been highlighted, is, do you see any unexpected areas where either the environmental movement will coalesce in response to this and it'll create kind of a new definition of sustainability, or where you could actually make progress with the Trump administration that you couldn't have otherwise made? On environmental goals. And so first on the academic response, and then on the unexpected areas of potential progress that you'd see.
I would just say, to extend what I said about the academic, we've said 1,000 times we need interdisciplinary. We've said 1,000 times we need problem solving. We need a different approach. But we also need, partly this sense of respect and engagement, we need to understand what people are doing that's very different. And I would say, quite frankly, I don't think a lot of people understand what we're trying to do with the world's religions and why they need to be engaged in this conversation. And that's partly because science has kept this a bit at a distance. So frankly, let's engage. You know what? There's 1 billion Muslims, there's 1 billion Confucians, there's 1 billion Hindus. Northern India is just, blanketed with the most incredible smog and fog. We have to engage these communities, and they are ready and willing, some of them, to engage. There are problems as well. So all of this is, intensely contested. But what I'm saying is our school has got to embrace larger and larger people to be part of the solutions here. And I would say that extends to the responses from the environmental movement. I think this is a tremendous opportunity, as I think our panelists have said as well, to engage, to disagree, but to move forward with new partnerships. And I can't echo enough what each one of them has said, but I'm just highlighting, we've got to join the international community. It is an embarrassment, as you know, going to many of these COP meetings and elsewhere. Why are we always on the edge and the outside? It is beyond description. So that is a huge goal that we can think about in terms of the movement, but also our school. Are we international enough? Are we engaged and informed about other cultures and peoples and so on? Multiculturalism is an international movement, not simply a national one.
Yeah, can I just add to that? And I think that in universities all over the world, we need to add to the curriculum something about that, leadership training. How do we reach out to the other in our own countries but elsewhere? I think the United States, again, watching it for so many decades now from the outside and internationally, the United States delegations to these international conversations usually just don't know how to engage. First of all, very few people speak other languages. And even though English is the international language, it might not be if the United States, might not remain so. So I think that some sort of skill building, it was great to have that session on storytelling, for example, but some sort of skill building about multicultural communications. And that is actually just as true in one country as it is internationally, would help, really. I mean, I just could tell you one story that during a Democratic administration at that terrible Copenhagen COP, some of you might have been there, climate COP, when it was time for the heads of state to speak, there was one person in the US chair, just in front of the IUCN chair. And when President Obama was about to speak, a huge delegation tromped in and then listened to the president and then walked out, even though there were very many important people, South Africa, Brazil, et cetera, speaking afterwards. We just need to learn some good manners toward each other, really. And I would recommend universities to embrace those kinds of skill building too, which is a part of communications, but leadership type of communication. One more thing about universities, and I'm talking to several people here. In the UN system, there are these special interest groups, but universities are not a part of that. And some of us are pushing that actually Yale could take a leadership role in that a university should also be a part of these civil society groups, scientists, youth, women, and so on, faith-based organizations. But universities have so much to give, and I mean students and faculty. Mm-hmm.
I take the mission of Yale and F&ES very seriously in terms of saying that we are leaders and we train leaders. And so why is that so critically important? And for all of you to, I genuinely believe, think of yourself as leaders rather than as part of existing mechanisms. Because I believe in my heart of hearts that sustainability is inextricably linked to innovation. Mm-hmm. And innovation does not just take the form of new science or technology or engineering, which is all very important, but in terms of new mechanisms for policy, new mechanisms for communication. And innovation will always face a strong fight from the status quo. And in the absence of leadership, the status quo will win. Yeah. So when we're talking about training new leaders and new leaders being engaged, it's because in the absence of leadership, in the absence of innovation, we will stay on the trajectory we're on, which is a tragic trajectory. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the role of the university.
Yeah, very good.
I think we're having these conversations now about our role, and this is fantastic to do so. Again, I would make it into a hypothesis. Leadership leads to change. And it might at some point, and it may not at other points. I would also add an additional hypothesis that both pedagogically and in terms of our centers that we nurture, we've got to better incorporate the concept of power. Directly and be explicit about it. And we have these awkward conversations and we raise them, but we should make them less awkward. Okay, because there are big elephants in the room about power. I'll give you just two examples that I think are important. One comes from a conversation with Jolisa. Where's Jolisa? Oh, okay, Jolisa. In my office last week, after the events of the election. And we had a long conversation because she was basically saying in a gist, welcome to my world. Okay, this was not new to her. We're all really upset. Yeah. And one example was she's 8 years old, and I did this in class already. I shouldn't do this again. Yeah, 8 years old, and she's racially profiled by the police and stopped. Okay, now is she supposed to be respectful with people on that and have a conversation about that? I don't think so. I think she should be in a social movement that doesn't have that conversation. My hypothesis, right? And we actually have that with Black Lives Matter. Somewhat. So I just don't know whether the big power issues are always about engagement or for reinforcing power. In our school, the two major organizations that have the most extension resources attached to them, I think, anyway, or two of them of the key ones, We're the Center for Business and the Environment, which I'm a part of and engage with a lot, and industrial ecology, and I engage with faculty there. But they both have a certain dimension about the power issue, about who's involved, okay? And it's certainly a pro-business friendly or environmental, I would argue, overall. Even the name, for business and the environment. How do we handle that? You know, I wouldn't say, change them. They're great organizations. But what's not there? So I'm going to recommend that we have a Center for the Study of Environment and Social Movements to be sort of alongside these, okay? And study social movements and how they actually work, and get Theta Scotchbill in, and people study these things, and bring them in and have those conversations too.
I like that.
We have just a little bit of time left. I'm wondering, there's been a lot of votes for any unexpected areas of progress that you see, either where this community coalesces and changes and things shaped in response to the Trump administration, or that you could actually see progress under a new administration.
The very quick thing that I'd say is it's not a trivial point to say that very unexpected progress on environmental issues, specific environmental issues, have happened under administrations such as the George H.W. Bush administration.
Yeah.
We all know Teddy Roosevelt's iconic. We know that things happened in the early 70s. The presence of an administration, there's the saying in Washington that only Nixon could go to China. What did that mean? It meant that Nixon was understood to be such anti-communist rhetoric and things like that, that it had to be someone like that was able to do unanticipated things and open up the dialogue with China. In the same way, there are often, throughout history, progress made from the exact people that you would think oppose it, whether it's on civil rights or et cetera, and I'll just leave it at that.
I would just pick that up. That's so great. My whole field of study, Asian studies, came out of the Second World War. There was almost nothing in universities in this country and even in Europe before the Second World War, and they became robust. Right. All of a sudden, we understand 2/3 of the world's people in new ways, and we're still at that. So I think this is a moment for incredible coming together. It's also a moment for going deeper in ourselves, for resilience. And I want to just signal to the school, I think this is an amazing moment. Indy Burke, I think our new dean, is really making an effort to create community and to reformulate a mission statement for the school. And I think this is tremendous. So it will be in response to the world we live in, but that is, I think, a signal point of optimism for us at the school.
I would like to just build on that and support what Ben said, that this university and others should really look at the environmental and social movement and addressing that as a separate center. And the fact that there is a community being built here is already a start. A movement cannot just happen by us going out on the street. It really should be thought out now. We don't have so much time. And let this university contribute to that. I think it would be very worthwhile. And let that message spread to other universities too. I'll take it to Europe next year.
Great.
Can I just add one thing too? Even though I think this idea I raised as a hypothesis would make some sense, I think the school's role is to study, not advocate for social movements. We can bring analytical attention, just the way business and the environment we shouldn't be advocating for, we should be studying it.
Yes.
And then from that, seeing what are some strategies that emerge for addressing these problems we care about. And that distinction can be made across all of our different communities.
But I think we have to redefine what's advocacy. Are we advocating for the future of life and life systems? So we might need a broader understanding of that. And also, are we as faculty to say what students want to do in terms of their advocacy? I think the doors for discussion are already open, and that's great.
Yeah.
I think Sunday night there's a Standing Rock concert to help support. Fantastic. What's happening out there? Thank you.
Great. And please join me in thanking the panel for taking the time to think through these incredibly challenging and complex questions and sharing their perspectives today.
Thank you, Steve.
Just as a quick note, in terms of keeping the conversation alive, obviously you've got this link. You can continue to submit questions online. We'll bring all those together and then bring them back out to the community. As well, we'll send out a note looking for your creative and effective responses on the broad spectrum of engagement that you've seen here, from opposition to collaboration on what do you think should happen next. So many thanks, and have a great afternoon. We'll be sending that out through F&ES Announce, just like Melanie had done before.
A lot of our students seem to feel that, passion is not only necessary, but sufficient.
I
No, I'm not